The air in the Whispering Pines Community Hall smelled like cheap casserole, pine-scented air freshener, and the faint metallic tang of 28 neighbors holding their breath. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, string lights twinkled along the cul-de-sac, casting frantic shadows on perfectly manicured lawns that had to stay exactly 2.5 inches tall or else. Inside, the only light that mattered was the one glinting off Karen Hargrove's crystal punch glass. 10. Someone slurred through eggnog. 9. The countdown rumbled like a polite riot building toward a release that would never come for me. Karen, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association for 12 glorious years, raised her hand. The room fell silent faster than a lawnmower on Sunday morning. She tapped the rim of her glass with a manicured nail. Ting. Sharp as a lean notice. Before the clock strikes, she said, her voice a smooth, practiced soprano that carried to every folding chair. We have one final piece of association business. A final gift for the year. Her eyes found me. I was standing near the refreshment table, close enough to feel the dry heat from the portable heater but far enough from the group to be considered that problem resident. I had been mastering this exact distance for 2 years. Avery, she said. My name sounded like a parking violation in her mouth. Please step forward. I didn't move. I simply met her gaze, holding my untouched cup of lukewarm cider. The bubbles rose and died against the plastic. A perfect little metaphor for my life in Whispering Pines. Karen's smile was a thin white line. She loved an audience. As you all know, our association is built on contribution, on harmony, on absolute loyalty to the covenants we all signed. When one element fails to perform, when it becomes a drain on resources, a liability rather than an asset, we do not carry it. We enforce. We fine. We remove the dead weight. A few lawn chairs creaked. This was not the usual New Year's toast. This was an HOA board meeting with extra passive-aggressive sprinkles. Effective as of this moment, 11:58 p.m., Avery Thompson is no longer welcome at any Whispering Pines community events, facilities, or amenities. She is hereby banned. Removed from the directory. Her name will be struck from the holiday decorating roster and the block party planning committee. The covenants, as of tonight, no longer include her. She said it with the same dispassionate finality she used when mailing out $250 fines for unauthorized holiday light color variants. Clean. Corporate. A gasp rippled through the room. Not for me, but for the audacity. Karen's husband, Dr. Richard Hargrove, stepped forward. He was the neighborhood's retired cardiologist. A man who moved through life in a cloud of antiseptic efficiency and surgical precision. He looked magnificent in his navy blazer with the little HOA pin on the lapel. He placed his hand not on Karen's arm in support, but on the leather-bound covenant book that sat on the podium like a holy relic. I concur, he said. His voice was flat, without tremor. The voice he used to tell patients the surgery had not been successful. The documents are finalized. From this day forward, the privileges of Whispering Pines do not belong to you. I looked past them to my brother-in-law, Trent, 30 years old, rising star in local real estate, the golden son who had never failed. He was leaning against the snack table, swirling a plastic cup of punch. He caught my eye and raised his cup in a mock toast. A slow, satisfied smirk spread across his face. You earned this, he mouthed. He was right, just not in the way he thought. The entire performance had taken perhaps 90 seconds. The clock on the wall struck 11:59. 28 pairs of eyes were on me. They expected tears. They expected screaming, begging, a dramatic collapse onto the casserole table. They had just witnessed a public execution, and they were hungry for the gore. I gave them nothing. Slowly, with a hand that did not shake, I set my full cider cup down on the folding table. The click of plastic on plastic was deafeningly loud. I looked at Karen. I looked at Richard. I looked at Trent. "Thank you for my freedom," I said. My voice was clear and steady. Not a whisper, not a shout, just a fact. The shock in the room was a physical thing. A sudden vacuum that sucked all the air out. This was not in their script. I had broken the narrative. I turned and walked to the coat rack. My wool coat was there. Pulled it on. The movements deliberate. I zipped it up. I sat on the metal folding chair and pulled on my snow boots, lacing them tight. Every eye followed me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the scrape of my laces and the muffled pop of fireworks starting down the street. I did not run. I did not storm out. I simply opened the double doors and stepped out into the night. The cold hit me immediately, a clean, sharp slap that scoured the smell of eggnog and betrayal from my lungs. Sleet was falling now, stinging my face. I pulled my hood up and started walking. The Whispering Pines entrance arch loomed ahead, carved stone declaring harmony through compliance, in gold letters. I watched it pass by my window like a tombstone for a life I was now finished with. I drove out onto the main road and did not look in the rearview mirror. 10 minutes later, I pulled over at a dark scenic overlook. The only light came from my dashboard. I sat there for a long moment. The only sound the tick of the engine cooling and the howl of the wind. The adrenaline was a high-voltage current in my blood. But my hands were still. I took out my phone. I opened the voice memo app and pressed record. "My name is Avery Thompson," I said, voice even. "It is 12:07 a.m., January 1st. 36 minutes ago, Karen Hargrove publicly banned me from Whispering Pines. She thinks she just cut me off. She thinks she left me with nothing." A small, cold smile touched my lips. "They have no idea what I did this morning." I stopped the recording and saved it. Then I went to my photo gallery. The picture was the most recent one. It was a photo of a 30-page employment agreement. The last page was covered in fresh blue ink. My signature, Avery Thompson, clear and strong, and beneath it, the signature of Lydia Voss, director of the National Homeowners Oversight Coalition. The logo at the top seemed to pulse in the dashboard glow. Oversight Coalition. I stared at it for a full minute. The key to the director's office was not a metaphor. It was in my bag, tucked inside the welcome packet I had picked up in Austin yesterday during my secret final meeting. I closed the photo and opened my text messages. I navigated to the one thread that wasn't full of poison. Aunt Claire, my mother's estranged sister, the one who had escaped the neighborhood 30 years ago and never looked back. I typed into the draft box. "It's done. On my way." My thumb hovered over send. The urge to let someone know I was safe was overwhelming. But I held back. The announcement wasn't public yet. My new role, my new organization, my new life. They had fired the first shot. A public spectacle designed for maximum humiliation. My response would be different. It would not be a spectacle. It would be a certified letter. It would be a state investigation. It would be the sound of a rival flag being planted firmly in their perfectly mowed territory. I put the phone down, took a deep breath of the sterile, warming air in my car, and put the SUV in gear. I was finally truly free, and I was about to become very, very busy. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association operated on one unwritten, unbreakable law. Either you comply or you get out of the way and stay silent. In our world, compliance had a very specific definition. It was defined by Karen Hargrove. She had started her reign with a single complaint about a neighbor's mailbox being 2 inches too tall. Through a combination of ruthless enforcement, predatory fine stacking, and an almost supernatural instinct for what the HOA board would rubber stamp, she had transformed that single complaint into a chain of absurd covenants that now strangled 600 homes across Whispering Pines. Karen didn't just sell harmony. She sold the fantasy of perfect suburban order, scrubbed clean, mowed weekly, and priced per violation. She was brilliant, and she was a void. Her husband Richard was her perfect counterpart. He was the chief medical director at the local private heart center where retired executives went to have their arteries replaced. Metaphorically or literally, his world was one of sterile fields, precise incisions, and zero margins of error. He ran his life and ours like a surgical schedule. Every blade of grass was accounted for, every holiday light predicted. He demanded the same clinical standards from the neighborhood. Affection was a resource allocated based on compliance. Failure was a contamination. And then there was Trent. Trent was the perfect product of this environment. He was the heir, the golden son, the one who had never disappointed. He breezed through his real estate license and landed a coveted spot at the biggest brokerage in town. He specialized in luxury compliance flips, which was a bitter irony given that our neighborhood's wealth was built on fining people into perfection. Trent's Instagram was a masterwork of curated success, full of photos of him in expensive polo shirts, shaking hands on multimillion-dollar closings that supposedly preserved property values while enriching his commission. He was Karen's mirror and Richard's proof of concept. On the other hand, was the deviation. I was the variable they couldn't control. I had made the mistake of loving the work, not the win. I had moved to Whispering Pines 2 years ago after a corporate layoff, armed with a degree in data analytics and a desire to actually improve things. I graduated top of my class, specializing in process optimization and resident satisfaction metrics. I didn't just want to follow the rules. I wanted to model seasonal fine elasticity, optimize enforcement efficiency, and analyze complaint data to predict neighbor behavior. I spoke fluent legalese, spreadsheet, and polite Midwestern. By any objective metric, I was overwhelmingly qualified to serve on the HOA board. I was, in fact, more qualified in the actual business of community management than Karen, who focused on power, or Trent, who focused on sales. And so upon settling in, I did the logical, expected thing. I prepared. I spent weeks polishing my proposal, crafting a 20-page presentation on digital compliance tracking that would reduce paperwork by 60% and eliminate selective enforcement. I logged into the HOA portal and submitted my application for the open board seat. It wasn't a power position. It was a data seat, a place to start and prove my value from the ground up. It was a role that would analyze violation data and support fair enforcement. It was exactly what I was trained to do. I submitted my application at 9:05 a.m. on a Tuesday. By noon, my life had been silently redirected. I found out later from a source I had cultivated in the neighborhood admin office exactly what happened. My application, flagged as internal resident, was routed for review. Trent, who had a habit of monitoring the portal he had no business monitoring, saw it first. He didn't call me. He didn't ask about my goals. He forwarded my entire meticulously crafted proposal, my resume, my analytics transcripts, my letters of recommendation directly to Karen. The email he sent had a single attached line. I saw the screenshot. It read, "We don't need spreadsheet nerds on the board. This is embarrassing." The order from Karen to the board was even more succinct. "Delete this from the pipeline. No interview." I was not just rejected. I was erased. I was denied even the courtesy of a form letter. I had never even applied. The real performance, however, came 3 nights later. It was the weekly HOA Harmony Hour, which was just a mandatory potluck at the community hall. The mood was celebratory. Trent was in town. Karen called for the good wine. We gathered under a chandelier made from fake crystal that probably cost more than my car. A toast, Karen announced, raising her glass, to Trent, who just closed the biggest sale in the subdivision. He's bringing in a bonus this quarter larger than our entire landscaping budget. To Trent, Richard echoed, his smile precise. He is building a legacy. They clinked glasses. I sat there, my fork hovering over a piece of dry chicken that had already gone cold. I hadn't received a single callback for any of the other volunteer positions I'd applied for, and I was beginning to suspect that delete from the pipeline had extended beyond just the board. I took a bite. The meat was like ash. Karen's gaze found me as sharp and invasive as one of Richard's scalpels. Your brother-in-law just closed a deal worth several $100,000. Avery, what have you closed? I looked down at my plate. I looked at the perfectly seared, perfectly dry, perfectly cold piece of chicken. I looked at Karen, beaming at her nephew. I looked at Trent, checking his commission spreadsheet under the table. In that moment, the unwritten law became crystal clear. Comply or be silent. I had tried to contribute, to join, to improve. They had not just silenced me. They had told me I was not even allowed to be in the race. So I chose a different path. If I could not be part of Whispering Pines, I would be a ghost. I would be an auditor. The following week, I stopped trying to volunteer inside the system. I expanded my search, looking for something specific, something that would put me inside the machine but not a machine Karen owned. I found it 2 counties over. I took a part-time consulting gig as a night auditor for a small property management firm that handled distressed HOAs. It was a competitor's territory, but not a direct one. It was close enough to be relevant, but far enough to be invisible. The night auditor shift is the loneliest job in compliance. It's a graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Just you, the silent spreadsheet, and the numbers. The job is to balance the books, to reconcile the day's chaos, to run the reports that tell the story of the entire association's operation. It was the ultimate humiliation. The spreadsheet nerd role Trent had sneered at. They didn't know I had a degree in data analytics. They didn't know that while I was entering violation codes and handling late-night complaint calls, I was also being given the keys to the entire kingdom. I was the one who saw everything. I sat behind that polished desk, the office silent around me, and I began my real education. I watched, I listened, and I started to write. I bought a simple leather-bound notebook. It never left my side. During those long quiet hours, I didn't just run the standard reports. I downloaded the raw data. I started logging everything. Violation patterns from different blocks. The exact drop-off rate for online appeals versus phone calls. The most popular and most profitable fine categories. From grass height to holiday light color. I tracked appeal denial rates and cross-referenced them with board meeting minutes and weather patterns. I learned Whispering Pines pressure points, their inefficiencies, the gaps in enforcement that were leaking money straight into Karen's personal community improvement fund. I was no longer Avery Thompson, the failed resident. I was just Avery Thompson, the quiet night auditor, and I was building a database. I was building a case. I was, in my own silent way, leading, and they were all, for once, blissfully, stupidly silent. The thing about a graveyard shift is that you pray for it to be boring. You want the hours to drag. You want the only sound to be the hum of the server. Boredom is profitable. Boredom means the systems are working. My streak of boredom ended on a peak season Friday night in February. I had just come on shift at 11 p.m., taking the handoff from the frantic evening manager Brian. The lobby was a war zone. Brian looked like he had seen a ghost. "Don't go out there, Avery," he whispered, gesturing to the waiting area like it was an active volcano. "Just answer the phones." The waiting area, which was supposed to be a quiet haven of complaint forms, was a churning mass of 2 very different, very angry groups of people. In one corner, huddled near their clipboards, was a group of about 20 retired teachers. They were impeccably dressed, furious, and all talking at once. They were the coalition fighting the new no visible solar panels rule that had just been rammed through. In the other corner and spilling out onto the front patio was a group of about 30 young families. They were exhausted, loud, wearing matching Save Our Gardens t-shirts, and had just been informed that their backyard vegetable plots were in violation because edible plants cannot be visible from the street. The reason for this chaos was a classic amateur hour mistake. A new enforcement coordinator, hired 2 weeks prior, had double-booked the same violation hearing slot for both groups. Both parties had appeal forms. Both had paid filing fees. Both were now threatening to sue, burn the HOA to the ground, and in the case of the Garden families, find Brian's car. I've called the president. Brian stammered, his eyes darting between the groups. She's not answering. I've offered them free copies of the Covenant book. The teachers threw their receipts at me. I looked at the teachers. Their leader, a silver-haired woman, was now trying to explain her frustration to a terrified intern in broken, angry legalese. The intern looked like he was about to cry. This was it. The moment where a system fails, and you see what it's really made of. I unhooked the rope dividing the back office from the waiting area and walked straight into the fire. I ignored the Garden families. They were a noise complaint, not a revenue crisis. I walked directly to the teacher coalition. I stood in front of her, waited for her to pause for breath, and then I spoke, not in corporate jargon, but in the fluent, formal compliance language I had perfected in grad school. Ms. Reynolds, I said, I apologize profoundly for the chaos. She stopped cold. Her entire group went silent. She stared at me. I was just a woman in a simple black blazer, a name tag that said Avery. But I had just changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. You speak our language? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion but also, for the first time, a sliver of hope. Yes, ma'am, I continued, keeping my voice low, calm, and professional. The president has made a terrible error. What she offered you, free copies of the book, is an insult. It's not a solution. Please give me 10 minutes. I will not offer you an excuse. I will offer you an experience. Something private, and better than the hearing you booked. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She didn't trust the HOA, but she was willing for one moment to trust me. 10 minutes, she said. She turned to her group and relayed the message. The immediate frantic anger subsided into a low, simmering collective glare. The clock was ticking. I turned and walked away. I walked past Brian, who was still on the phone, probably with his wife, complaining. I went straight to the conference room. Who's in charge of the AV? I snapped. A junior admin, barely 20, raised his hand. Exec went home. Great. Do we still have the winter greenhouse out back? The glass one? Yeah, but it's closed for the season. It's just storage and it's cold. Get the keys, I said. Now, I grabbed 2 interns. You 2 with me. We're moving furniture. In the next 3 minutes I had assessed the greenhouse. It was beautiful. A glass atrium filled with dormant plants and dusty folding chairs, the sleet falling softly on the panes all around. It was also freezing. Brian, I yelled. He jumped. Where are the propane heaters for the outdoor patio in storage unit 4? Get them. Get 6 of them and call maintenance. I need you to verify the ventilation fans in this room are operational. I'm not asphyxiating our residents. He stared at me, dumbfounded. Go now. He ran. I ran back to the front desk. The complaint tracking system was blinking an angry red. The server was down. Of course it was. I can't even log their appeals, Brian said, appearing at my elbow, breathless from carrying a propane tank. The system is offline. We're not logging them, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard, forcing the terminal into an offline administrative mode. We're not charging them for the hearing, but we are charging them for the new service node. I'm creating a temporary package code. A what? A code so we can track the revenue, the admin cost, the board cost. It has to go into the right bucket, Brian. Or my night audit will be hell, and the HOA's books will be wrong. This isn't a free-for-all. This is a targeted recovery. I created the code, tied it to a dummy hearing, and printed a single chit. A woman who had been standing quietly by the now empty water cooler stepped forward. I hadn't even noticed her. She was in her 50s, with graying hair, wearing a simple dark wool sweater that probably cost more than my car. She looked like just another resident, but she hadn't been part of either group. She had just been watching. That was impressive, she said, her voice quiet with an edge of authority. The way you handled the queue.
I'm sorry.
Ma'am, were you waiting? I asked, my front desk smile snapping into place. No, she said, moving closer. I was observing. You split the resident flow, created a new service node, and you're rotating your staff. I glanced at the interns who I had instructed to take turns 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off to manage the setup in the cold. You reduced the perceived wait time by creating a buffer, she continued, and by my estimate, you just cut your queue length in the main lobby by 38%. I stopped. She wasn't talking like a resident. She was talking like an analyst. She was talking like me. It's just triage. Ma'am, I said, my guard going up. She smiled, a small, genuine smile. I'm Lydia Voss, Executive Director of the National Homeowners Oversight Coalition. The name hit me like a physical blow. Lydia Voss, the woman who had taken down 3 abusive HOAs in the last 18 months. The single greatest threat to Karen Hargrove's little empire. She was the bogeyman Karen talked about at board meetings, and she was standing in my lobby on the worst night of the year, watching me put out fires. She was scouting. You're running a dynamic compliance model, aren't you? She asked, her voice dropping even lower. Based on the weather, I froze. I've been watching the fine rates at Whispering Pines all winter, she said. They're not just seasonal. They shift with the rainfall reports. 3 inches of rain. Your violation notices for visible puddles jump 7%. A heat wave warning. Your ancillary fines for unapproved garden hoses spike. That's not the board's work. They're not smart enough. Sue, isn't it? On the night shift. I didn't say anything. I reached under the desk. I pulled out my leather-bound notebook, the one I had been filling for 6 months. I flipped to the back, past the records of systemic failures and selective enforcement issues. I opened it to the last page. It was a hand-drawn chart, a regression analysis. On the x-axis was inches of rainfall. On the y-axis was fine elasticity. I didn't say a word. I just slid the book across the counter. Lydia Voss looked down. She read the model. She traced the curve with her finger. She looked back up at me, and her expression was no longer just impressed. It was one of pure, unadulterated discovery. She looked like a woman who had just struck gold. Who are you, Avery? She asked. Before I could answer, the teacher coalition leader was back. Ms. Thompson, she said, her voice now calm. It has been 10 minutes. I turned to her, sliding my book back. This way. Your private experience is ready. I walked them out past the greenhouse now glowing with the warm light of the heaters. The tables were set. The coffee was being poured. The smell of fresh documents and hope was in the air. It was magical. The rest of the night was a blur. I balanced the books. I processed the revenue from the greenhouse hearing, carefully bucketing every cost. I dealt with the garden families by finally just calling the county ombudsman for a neutral mediation slot, getting them confined to a follow-up date. At 5 a.m., as the sky was turning a bruised purple, an email came through to the main office account. It was from the teacher coalition. It was a long, glowing paragraph, praising the innovative, resourceful, and truly five-star recovery of the brilliant Ms. Thompson. She called the greenhouse an unforgettable moment of neighborhood magic and said that because of me they would be filing their class action appeal with our support in the summer. She had CC'd the entire board. I printed it at 7 a.m. The evening manager finally came in. His eyes bloodshot. He had seen the email. "Avery," he said, his voice thick with a relief that was already turning sour. "Good job. You really handled this." "Thank you," I said, but he said, "I have to say the official report will need to be finessed. We can't have the board thinking I lost control of the waiting area." As he was speaking, the private line on his desk rang. It was the line I knew that only had one number programmed into it. He picked it up. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, his posture immediately straightening to terrified attention. "Yes, ma'am." "Right. Yes. I saw the email from the teacher group." "Yes, Avery." He looked at me, his face pale. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice dropping. "I understand completely. Keep her out of the spotlight." "I agree. Won't happen again." He hung up. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "A great team effort," he said, the words hollow. "We all really pulled together. That's what I'll tell the board." He walked away, leaving me alone at the desk. They had found me. Even here, Karen's shadow was so long it could reach me 2 counties away on a graveyard shift and still snatch the credit from my hands. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. I simply turned to my terminal. I took a high-resolution photo of the teacher's email. I took a screenshot of the internal memo the manager sent out 30 minutes later. The one that praised the quick thinking of the entire compliance team. My name was not in it. I saved them to a secure encrypted folder. I added them to my collection, and I knew with absolute certainty that my time at the small firm was over. Lydia Voss had seen the truth. Karen had just confirmed the motive. I finished my shift, clocked out, and walked into the bright, blinding Texas sunrise, my leather notebook tucked firmly under my arm. I walked out of the compliance office that morning at 7:01 a.m. The manager's false words, "a great team effort," still hanging in the frigid air. I didn't go to sleep. I went to a small 24-hour diner, ordered black coffee, and opened my laptop. I had a personal email address, one never associated with Whispering Pines, one I used for applications, and now for espionage. There was one new message. It had arrived at 6:32 a.m. While I was still reconciling the fine logs from the Garden families. The sender was Lydia Voss. The subject line was 2 words, "Confidential Inquiry." The body of the email was less than 50 words. It was not an offer. It was a summons. Contained a link to a secure portal, a temporary username, and a password that was a long random string of characters. The instructions were simple. Log in before 9 a.m. If you are the person I believe you are, you will know what to do. I logged in. The portal was a sterile gray interface. No company logos. Just a single module labeled Assessment 1. This was not an interview. It was a test. I clicked it. Round 1. The off-season problem. A trove of data files downloaded. Fine reports, violation logs, resident demographics, and P&L statements for a property I didn't recognize. The data was clearly anonymized, but I could smell the location. Rule-obsessed, and dead as a doornail from April to October. It was a Whispering Pines profile. I was certain of it. The prompt, "You have 3 hours. Submit a viable strategy to triple off-season revenue without compromising the brand." This was a case study I would have paid to take in grad school. I closed the portal, paid for my coffee, and went back to my small rented apartment. I put my phone on silent, pulled my leather notebook from my bag and got to work. They weren't asking for ideas. They were asking for a model. I ignored fluffy concepts like Community outreach. I dove into the resident data. The HOA was attracting a single demographic, the rule-obsessed retiree. But the off-season complaint data showed a tiny statistical blip, an anomaly that any other analyst would have dismissed, a 1.3% cohort of residents who filed appeals instead of paying fines. That was my entry point. I didn't propose a block party package. I proposed a full data-driven pivot. I called it the compliance wellness cycle. I cross-referenced the appeal filer cohort with state ombudsman pricing. I built a financial model that shifted the operational focus from high fines to high-cost recovery. We would leverage the HOA brand not for punishment but for authenticity. Private mediation sessions where the violation hearings used to be, and appeal packages using local legal aid and cedar-scented resolution rooms. I projected a new revenue stream, not just from fines, but from high-margin wellness packages targeting the exact demographic Karen ignored. I finished in 2 hours and 40 minutes. I uploaded the single PDF. I logged out. I slept for 5 hours. The deepest sleep I'd had in a year. When I woke up, there was a new email. Assessment 2, live simulation. 8 p.m. Sharp. At 8 p.m. I logged in. This time the interface was a chat window. A single line appeared. You are the compliance director of a remote 5-star HOA. A blizzard has knocked out local power. Backup generators are failing. You have a high-profile resident, a tech billionaire, demanding a helicopter evacuation for his family. He is on the line. What is your first action? This was a test of priority. Amateurs would try to solve the VIP's problem. I typed my response. My first action is to disregard the VIP's demand and confirm the execution of the resident-led safety matrix. All residents are to be accounted for, moved to the centralized thermally efficient safe zone in the community hall and their status confirmed. My second action is to get a hard timeline on generator repair. My third is to inform the VIP that all air travel is grounded by federal and state advisories, and his family safety is like all our residents my absolute priority. The helicopter is not an option. Safety is. The chat window was silent for a full minute. Then a new line. The generator repair is 12 hours. The safe zone can only hold 80% of your residents. The VIP is now offering you a $100,000 personal bonus to find a way to get his family out. I typed. The bonus is irrelevant. This is a load management problem, not a capacity problem. I initiate the rolling warmth protocol, rotating the remaining 20% of residents from their insulated homes to the safe zone in 2-hour shifts. The VIP's bonus offers a liability. I documented in my log in case of future legal action, but I do not acknowledge it to him. The answer remains no. New line. The blizzard is easing. Power is back. The VIP is furious. He is threatening to destroy the HOA's reputation. I typed. He is entitled to his anger. He is not entitled to a refund. He was kept safe. I will offer him a complimentary non-expiring voucher for a future mediation session to be used after the storm has passed. And he has had time to reflect on the value of his family's life. The chat window went blank. Assessment 3 will be scheduled via secure email. The next day, the final round was set. It was a video call. When I logged in, my camera was on, but theirs was not. I was speaking to a black screen. Then a voice, not Lydia's, spoke to me in perfect formal compliance language. It was a Q&A about my presentation for the Teacher Coalition. They wanted to know about contribution margins based on appeal channels versus direct-to-ombudsman filings. They hammered me for 15 minutes trying to find a hole in my numbers. I gave them none. When the grilling stopped, the screen remained dark. Then Lydia's voice. Hello, Avery. That was the last of the technicals. You've passed. Now for the only question that matters. The video feed clicked on. It was just her sitting in an office that was all glass and reclaimed wood. She looked tired and she looked right at me. This is a very small, very incestuous world, she said. Your last name is Thompson, but everyone knows you live in Whispering Pines. Our coalition is the single greatest threat to Karen Hargrove's legacy. She will find out you are here. She will come to you. She will not come with anger. She will come with a blank check. She will offer to buy you out, to bribe you, to give you everything she's always withheld. If you will just sign this covenant, take my secrets, and come home. She leaned into the camera. Her eyes were like chips of ice. So, here is the test. Avery, when Karen makes that offer, what do you do? I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to think. I looked right back at her. You're asking the wrong question. Lydia, I said. You're assuming she's offering me something I want. You're assuming I have a price. I leaned in just as she had. My name is Avery Thompson. I sign my name to my work. I do not sign anyone else's. My home is not on her balance sheet. If she comes to me with an offer, I will do what I've always been trained to do. I'll tell her I'm not at liberty to discuss proprietary information, and I will show her the door. Lydia Voss stared at me for a long, silent 10 seconds. Then she broke into that small, rare smile. Welcome to the Oversight Coalition. Director, she said. HR will send the package. The package arrived the next morning. Not by email, but via a bonded courier. It was an employment contract. The title was there, Director of HOA Compliance Investigations. The base salary was $265,000. But that wasn't the real number. The real number was the equity. 6% vested over 4 years tied directly to 2 metrics I could control. Net Promoter Score of residents and revenue recovered from abusive fines. She wasn't giving me a job. She was giving me a weapon. The non-compete was exactly as I'd expected. Narrow, surgical, and fair. It only restricted me from working for a direct competitor HOA in 5 specific counties for 18 months. It was ironclad, and it was drawn up by a lawyer who was clearly better than anyone Karen employed. I did not sign it. Not yet. I made one phone call from a pay-as-you-go burner phone I had bought for cash 2 months ago. Aunt Claire, I said when she picked up. I've been waiting for this call, she said. Claire was my mother's sister, the one who had seen the void in Karen 30 years ago, sold her tiny share of the original subdivision for pennies and built a life for herself free of the Whispering Pines name. I need you to read something, I said. We met at a truck stop diner in Austin, Texas. A neutral, anonymous location. I slid the contract across the sticky table. She read it every single page while sipping a lukewarm coffee. She didn't say a word. Finally, she slid it back. It's a good contract, she said. The equity metrics are aggressive, but the non-compete is clean. She's not trying to trap you. She took a sip. Karen will try to destroy you for this. She'll see it as a declaration of war. It is, I said. She nodded, a slow, satisfied smile. Good. Then there's only one piece of advice. Stay silent until you can't be overturned. Sign it. Hide it. Do not tell a soul. Not me. Not anyone. Let them make the first move. Let them think they have all the power. Walk into that New Year's meeting and let Karen play her hand. Let her burn her own house down. Your job is to be standing in the ashes with the only key that matters. We drove to a small, dusty notary's office in an Austin strip mall. I signed 2 originals with a wet blue ink signature. Avery Thompson, the notary, a woman who looked bored with her life, applied her seal. She didn't know she was witnessing a coup. Aunt Claire took one original. For safekeeping, she said. I took the other. When I got back to my apartment in Whispering Pines, I executed the final phase. I logged into the secure oversight portal and uploaded my signed copy. Then I permanently deleted the entire email chain with Lydia using a secure wipe utility. But I kept a copy. I drove to a local document service, the kind that archives old legal files. I had them convert my entire contract, all 30 pages, into a single roll of microfilm. It was analog. It was unhackable. It was permanent. I took the tiny fingernail-size roll, and I sealed it along with my leather notebook in a small fireproof safe I had bought 2 weeks before. I locked it, and I hid the safe in the back of my closet, under the floorboards. The trap was set. The asset was secure. That night, back in my room, I looked at my phone. An invite had arrived from Karen's personal assistant. The annual Whispering Pines New Year's Eve community meeting. Your presence is required. Required? I looked at the date. December 31st. I knew with the cold, hard certainty of an analyst predicting a blizzard. What was coming? This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons for a public execution. Karen's final gift. I set an alarm on my phone. 11:30 p.m. December 31st. I was going to be there. I was going to watch them play their last pathetic card. And I was going to be the only person in that room who knew that the game was already over. The community hall was overheated. The thick, suffocating warmth that smelled of pine sap and the faint metallic tang of 28 neighbors holding their breath. The light was all wrong. A deep, heavy yellow cast by the massive fake crystal chandelier that hung over our heads like the skeleton of some vanquished beast. I was standing near the refreshment table, my back to the heater, watching Karen perform. Karen Hargrove raised her crystal punch glass. The ting-ting-ting as she tapped it with her HOA pin cut through the nervous pre-midnight chatter. She was a woman who loved a stage, and she had built this one herself. A fortress of fake wood paneling and reinforced ego on the edge of Whispering Pines. As she smiled, her gaze locking on me, I could see the thick vein on the side of her neck pulse. A steady thump-thump-thump beating time with the lie she was about to tell. Before the clock strikes, she said, her voice a smooth, polished soprano. We have one final piece of association business. A final gift for the year. She was enjoying this. The room was silent. The 28 neighbors frozen in their holiday sweaters. Punch cups held halfway to their lips. She produced a single folded sheet of paper from her blazer. It was heavy cream-colored vellum. It was a prop and a good one. As you all know, she continued, the Whispering Pines Association is built on contribution, on harmony, on absolute loyalty. She unfolded the paper. This, she said, holding it up, is an addendum to the covenants, ratified this evening by myself and Richard. It concerns the divestment of a failed asset. I felt the eyes land on me, all 28 pairs, a heavy physical weight. I did not move. I did not flinch. I felt a sudden, strange calm settle over me, the cold, clear focus of an auditor finding a catastrophic error in the books. Effective as of this moment, 11:58 p.m., she read, her voice ringing with theatrical finality. Avery Thompson is hereby and forever banned. She is removed from the community directory, from all amenities, and from any and all claims to the privileges, events, or goodwill of Whispering Pines. She had practiced that, the slight pause, the deliberate, insulting use of my full name, the one I had been using quietly at my night shift job, the one I would soon make official. She had finished. The judgment was passed. She looked at me, her eyes bright, expectant, waiting for the collapse. I gave her nothing. Richard Hargrove stepped forward. He was magnificent in navy, his spine as straight and unyielding as a surgical steel rod. He moved to the large leather-bound covenant book on the podium, the one filled with violation logs and appeals, a ludicrous faux aristocratic prop. He picked up a heavy ink-filled pen. With a precise surgical motion, he signed his name to the addendum Karen had just placed inside. His signature was not a signature. It was an incision, a neat, bloodless cut excising me from the record. He did not look at me. He was simply closing a file. From the snack table I saw a flash of blue light. My brother-in-law Trent was holding his phone up. He was filming. He was capturing the moment, my public execution for his own amusement. As I watched, his face hidden behind the dark rectangle of his phone. He smiled. He tapped the screen and I knew with sickening certainty what he was doing. He was sending the clip to the Whispering Pines Inner Circle group chat. He was adding a caption, something triumphant, a champagne bottle, a fireworks emoji. She's finally gone. I felt a sudden irrational urge to fix my jacket. I looked down. The cuff of my wool coat was slightly wrinkled. With a steady hand, I reached over and smoothed the fabric. I adjusted the button. It was a small physical thing to do, a task to occupy my hands while the room waited for my breakdown. Standing near the doorway was the only person not breathing the association's poisoned air. Aunt Claire. She hadn't been invited. She had simply shown up, a quiet ghost in a plum-colored coat. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She gave no sign of support, no pity. She simply watched me, her gaze flat and assessing. It was the look of one professional observing another. Show me what you're made of. I looked back at Karen, at Richard, who was blotting the ink, Trent, who was lowering his phone, a satisfied smirk on his face. The room was waiting. The silence was absolute. "Thank you for my freedom," I said. My voice was clear and steady. It cut through the overheated room like a shard of ice. I watched the shock register. Karen's smile faltered, the satisfaction turning to a flash of pure hot anger. Richard's hand, the one holding the pen, paused. Trent's smirk vanished, replaced by a confused scowl. This was not in their script. I turned. I did not run. I walked. My steps measured across the cheap carpet. I walked past the 28 stunned faces, a gallery of privilege and complicity. I reached the double doors. I pulled them open. The wind hit me instantly, a howling physical slap of sub-zero air. It tore the pine and eggnog smell from my lungs and replaced it with the clean, sharp scent of ice and freedom. The sleet was coming in sideways, a barrage of frozen needles. I stepped out onto the wide, dark sidewalk and pulled the heavy doors shut behind me. Click. The sound was small, but final. It was not the sound of a door being slammed. It was the sound of a lock engaging, a seal, the sound of a fireproof safe being secured. The end of a time. I pulled my hood up, bent my head against the wind, and walked into the storm. My boots crunched on the frozen sidewalk of the long, dark drive. Crunch, crunch, crunch. A metronome, ticking off the seconds of my new life. I did not look back at the hall. A glowing golden box of judgment on the hill. I kept my eyes on the darkness. It took 3 minutes to reach my SUV. It was already sheathed in a thin armor of ice. I got in, the engine turning over with a low, faithful rumble. I cranked the heat, the defrost, the wipers. I sat for a minute, my hands on the wheel. As the wipers fought a losing battle against the ice, I cleared the windshield, drove down the long drive, and passed under the massive carved Whispering Pines archway without a glance. I drove through the blinding, swirling snow, my world reduced to the 10 feet of road illuminated by my headlights. I drove up, climbing the winding subdivision road, away from the valley, away from the town, toward the pass near the summit of the county line. The snow momentarily eased. The wind was still a physical force, rocking the SUV on its suspension. I saw a dark patch of asphalt, a snowplow turnout, and I pulled over. I was alone. There was no sound but the howl of the wind and the tick-tick-tick of the engine. The valley I had just left was invisible, buried in clouds and darkness. I took out my phone. The screen was brutally bright. It was 12:07 a.m. I had 2 messages to send. First to Aunt Claire. My fingers were steady, not shaking from the cold or the adrenaline, just precise. It begins. I hit send. Second, I opened my secure texts to Lydia Voss. We had never spoken on this line. It was for activation only. I didn't type a word. I opened my photo gallery to the 2 pictures I had taken in my apartment in Austin. The first photo, the small black fireproof safe sitting on my floor. The second photo, a close-up of the notary seal on the contract. The timestamp clearly visible. December 30th. I sent both. It was not a question. It was not a request for help. It was a confirmation. The asset is secure. The plan is in motion. I put the phone down. I drove over the county line, the highest point, and began the long descent into the next valley. As I came down out of the clouds, the snow thinned far below me, scattered across the dark expanse. I could see the lights of a town. They were not warm. They were not welcoming. They were small, distinct, and sharp, like a handful of scattered fireflies, like data points on a map. Took another 2 hours to get to Austin. The corporate apartment the Oversight Coalition had secured for me was in a new, brutally modern building of glass and steel. It was anonymous. It was perfect. I let myself in, not with a key, but with a plastic card. The apartment was cold, silent, and smelled of new paint and industrial carpet. The furniture was minimal, functional, and had never belonged to anyone. I walked to the kitchen island. It was a single massive slab of cold gray granite. I took the key card from my pocket. I looked at it. Avery Thompson, Director, HOA Compliance Investigations. I placed the card on the granite. The plastic tapped against the stone. It was the only sound in the room. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 1:57 a.m. The new year. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I felt only the deep, quiet satisfaction of a complex system finally being brought online. I did not unpack. I did not celebrate. I walked to my bag, pulled out my new company-issued laptop, and sat at the cold granite island. I opened it. The screen glowed to life. I connected to the secure Wi-Fi, the password already memorized. I logged into the National Homeowners Oversight Coalition internal network for the first time as an active employee. My dashboard populated memos, org charts, data streams. I opened a new blank document, private memo, a log, a first entry. The cursor blinked. I typed one line, the title, the summary, the vow. At the New Year's meeting, Karen Hargrove banned me. I walked away. They had no idea what I did next. I stared at the words. Then I hit enter and began my new life. My new life began at 7 a.m. on January 2nd. There was no welcome breakfast. There was no human resources orientation, no packet of benefits to review. My onboarding was a lightning strike. Lydia Voss met me at the glass doors of the Austin corporate office. She didn't shake my hand. She handed me a black coffee and a security badge. "Welcome, Director," she said, already walking. "Let's get you online." She took me to a room that was less an office and more a command center dominated by a single massive glass wall that was currently dark. She tapped a console and the network architecture of the Oversight Coalition lit up. "This is you," she said. She wasn't pointing at a desk. She was pointing at a cluster of data streams. 600 homes in Whispering Pines are now under your direct audit authority. She paused, letting that last part land. She meant the entire subdivision operating directly in Karen's territory, breathing the same thin suburban air as the Whispering Pines covenants. "I don't care about the board members," Lydia continued, her back to me as she stared at the data. "They're set in their ways. I care about the end-to-end resident journey. From the first click on the appeal portal to the post-violation review. It's broken. It's full of friction. Your job is to fix it." My terminal was active before I even sat down. My credentials gave me root access to everything. For the first 72 hours, I did not introduce myself. I did not send a hello email. I just descended into the data. I pulled the raw server logs, the unvarnished, unfiltered truth. I ignored the summarized reports the board sent to residents. Those were performance art full of excuses and vanity metrics. I wanted the real dirty numbers, and I found them. I found the friction. I saw that average appeal processing times at our flagship subdivision spiked to 12 minutes on Friday afternoons. A lifetime of frustration for a resident paying $4,000 a year in dues. I found the leaks. Solar panel appeal leakage was catastrophic. We were letting 90% of residents file after they were already fined, which meant we were losing the battle for their time and their money to third-party lawyers. The pre-violation upsell was non-existent. I built a complaint heat map. I aggregated every negative review, every internal log, every maintenance request. The highest concentrations of red, the epicenter of resident anger, weren't the big things. They weren't the pools or the fences. They were the transitions, the moments of uncertainty, the gap between the mailbox and the fine notice, the gap between the fine notice and the appeal, the gap between wanting a reasonable rule and having to navigate a clunky portal to fight it. The system was full of bottlenecks. My job was to become the blade. My first directive was not a request. It was an execution order. I sent it at 5 a.m. on my fourth day. Title, Project Express Appeal Check-in. I was gutting the appeal desk. I authorized the capital expenditure for paperless self-service kiosks. No more handwritten appeal forms. No more waiting in line to get a hearing date. Residents would identify themselves with their existing violation code. For repeat filers, we would roll out an internal opt-in biometric system. I set the KPI, curb to resolution, in under 90 seconds. The old guard in enforcement balked, sending me frantic emails about losing the human touch. I replied to one. The most human touch is respecting our residents' time. Implement the kiosks. Next, I went after the supply chain. It was chaos. The 600 homes were all using different vendors for lawn service and holiday lighting. A messy, inefficient system based on the personal relationships of individual board members. It was the exact system Karen ran. A system built on handshakes, not on performance. I put the entire consolidated contract for all 600 homes out to bid. One vendor, one standardized high thread count compliance package, one set of appeal amenities. We signed a single unified deal 2 weeks later. The result? I cut 9% from our consolidated operational costs overnight. I also mandated a strict sustainability clause for biodegradable fine notices, not because it was right, but because my data showed eco-compliance was a metric we could market, and it was a direct shot at the Whispering Pines board, which still used wasteful, individually packaged violation letters. My team, the 12 people Lydia had assigned me, was a mix of shell-shocked data analysts and compliance veterans. I didn't care about their old titles. I sat them down on day 5 and completely restructured the department. I assigned their new roles based on the bottlenecks I had identified. You, I said to a veteran analyst, are no longer senior data scientist. You are director of appeal friction. Your only job is to get that processing time to 0. You, I said to a marketing manager, are now head of fine leakage. You stop the solar revenue from walking out the door. Their key performance indicators were simple, brutal, and visible as of that afternoon. I had the massive glass wall in our office turned into a live real-time dashboard. Every Monday the numbers reset. We tracked friction. We tracked queue length. We tracked appeal revenue capture. We measured everything. Then I unrolled my pet project, the rainfall model from my leather notebook. I piloted it at the Whispering Pines property. The old model was static winter fines. My model was alive, plugged directly into the NOAA weather feed API. When the forecast updated to predict a blizzard, The system automatically pushed targeted appeal packages to residents who were already on the routes, the ones who were about to be hit with visible puddles violations. The storm package. We called it a pre-staged mediation in their driveway, a guaranteed reservation at the resolution room, a private pre-booked ombudsman transfer. The offers were framed as safety, fairness, and convenience. They were, in fact, high-margin, high RPU upsells that cost us almost nothing to implement. In its first 30 days, the average revenue per user at the pilot property spiked 17%. It wasn't magic. It was data. It was listening to the wind and pricing it. Next, I standardized communication. I issued a mandatory bilingual training standard, English and Spanish for all enforcement staff in our southern blocks. English and legalese for the specialized inbound teams handling our high net worth appeals. I would not lose another teacher coalition. Finally, I sent the memo that changed the culture. It was one line. Title: Zero Friction. The new rule. Every resident complaint, whether by email, phone, in person, or on a third-party review site, must receive a direct personal response within 15 minutes, and not a "we are looking into this" automated reply. A real response from a real person with two distinct actionable solutions, an option A and an option B. This simple change put the resident back in control. It shifted the dynamic from complaining to choosing. The data followed. The glass wall in our office began to turn green. In the first 45 days, our consolidated Net Promoter Score, the NPS, the one metric Karen obsessed over and could never consistently move, jumped 9 points. It was a statistical impossibility. It was an earthquake. The complaint heat map. Once a field of burning red cooled to a pale satisfied pink, and the money, the real number, off-season recovered revenue per available home. The metric that defines the life or death of a seasonal HOA climbed 13%. We were making more money on a rainy Tuesday in April than the old regime had made on a holiday weekend. I was living on data, black coffee, and adrenaline. I had not slept in my own apartment in 3 days. Instead, just crashing on the cot in the back of my office. I was deep in a spreadsheet modeling the financial impact of our new appeal system when my terminal pinged. It was a direct message from Lydia. It was not praise. It was a new directive. The board is looking at your 45-day numbers. They think they're fake. They want to see you. You're keynoting the Austin Leadership Summit in March. Book your flight. I stared at the message. Austin, a leadership summit, a stage. This was not my plan. My plan was to stay in the dark. A ghost in the machine. A stage was a spotlight. As I was processing this, my personal phone, the burner, the one I kept in my desk drawer, buzzed. It was the first time it had made a sound since I had crossed the county line. I pulled it from the drawer. The screen lit up. A new text message from a number I knew by heart. Karen. She had found out. She must have heard the rumors, seen the data leaking from her own sources, heard that her band resident was now a director at her chief rival. The message was not an apology. It was not a question. It was a single cold command. Don't come home again. I stared at it. It was not an insult. It was an admission. It was the sound of a queen who knew for the first time that the walls of her castle were not as high as she thought. I didn't reply. I didn't block her. I simply pressed the side buttons on the phone, capturing a clean, perfect screenshot of the message. I saved it to the same encrypted cloud folder as the audio memo from my car and the email from the compliance manager. I locked the thread. It was just more data. Another proof point. I put the phone back in the drawer, closed it, and turned back to my monitor. I had a keynote speech to write.